Hello everybody, it's time to get boring. Now before you turn this video off, I'll explain what I mean. You know what's boring is hearing the same thing over and over and over again. That is by nature the definition of boring. Somebody says to you the same thing over and over and over again, watching the same show, listening to the same music, eating the same food. A lot of repetition makes things boring, but repetition is important for one big reason. Repetition is what lets you hopefully have information sink in up here, lets you go, okay, why are things the way they are? What I mean by this is that every once in a while, your parents, grandparents, aunt, uncle, wife, husband, whatever, will tell you to do something, but they'll also say something like, how many times do I have to tell you to, whatever it is. How many times do I have to tell you to clean up your room? How many times do I have to tell you to vacuum the hall? How many times do I have to tell you to put your toothbrush away? How many times do I have to tell you to hang your jacket up? Whatever it is that your parents, your grandparents, your aunt, uncle, your spouse, whatever, will say to you, how many times do I have to repeat this to you? Great question. Great question of how many times does this have to get repeated? Because in all honesty, the answer is usually for us quite a few times. It takes a long time for stuff to sink in. We are people who have a hard time working things out on the first, second, third, 10th, 12th, 50th time, and so they have to be repeated. Now, something like the books of Kings and Chronicles, now we're not going to go over all the repetitions, just know that they're there and why they're there. But the books of Kings and the Chronicles will tell you all about things being repeated over and over and over again. It's the same cycle that gets repeated over and over and over again. The cycle goes something like this. People live in Israel with God. They have a relationship with him. They trust him. He trusts them. They worship him and serve him only. But then things get too good. They don't get bad. They get the opposite. Too good. Everything's going too well. And people say, gosh, if things are going this well, why do we need God at all? So they start doing things like following after other gods, following them, worshiping them, building idols and temples and altars and poles to them. They'll worship Asherah or Baal or Beelzebub or Moloch or Dagon or any of these other things that come up in the last few books that we read. They break the first commandment, though. For sure do they break the first commandment. In breaking the first commandment, God withdraws his protection from them and lets them stand on their own. When God does that, things start to go bad for them. All of a sudden, a foreign nation will come in. The Ammonites, the Perizzites, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Philistines, whoever, will come in and will take over. At that point, when they are oppressed, the people of Israel will cry out to God and say, God, please save us. Help us from this. And God will send them a deliverer. They will fall back in line. They will worship God. And then the cycle, sadly, begins all over again. But here's the thing is it doesn't have to. At any point, Israel could break that chain. They could say, you know, we've been learning a lot from all these kings that have been coming before us. We've been learning a lot from all the kings and prophets who have been before us. We've learned so much about how to avoid the same problems over and over and over again. Why don't we skip the parts where we fall away from God? And they don't, but they should. The one who is most responsible for wrangling the kings and through them the people of Israel back into shape is Elijah. And Elijah's a big deal. Elijah is a big deal because Elijah is going to be the main prophet who is going to be standing up against this cycle. He's going to try and break this cycle a number of times. I'm not going to go over in great detail what leads us to this point, but if you go through the last half of 1 Kings from chapter, 12 or 13, right the way through to 17, you will find this cycle happening where people fall away from worshiping God, have to go back to worshiping God eventually, but only do so because bad things happen to them and they come back and remember God. Fine. That will take us to 1 Kings chapter 17, with Elijah the Tishbite being fed by the ravens and being sent to the widow of Zarephath. There is a drought And a drought's when there's no water. Now, for us, if there's a quick drought, it's no big deal because we have a lot of food stored up. Plenty of food, not hard to get to. But in Elijah's time, if you're without food, that's death. You don't have more than a little bit of food. When Elijah meets up with the widow of Zarephath in 1 Kings chapter 17, he says to her, please make me some food. And she says, I have no food. All I've got is some flour in a jar and some oil in a jug. I'm going to make myself one last loaf of bread for myself and my son. We're going to eat it and then die. That's your prognosis. Now, at that point, Elijah makes sure that the bread and the oil don't run out, the flour and the oil don't run out. And then, even though the woman's son does die, Elijah brings her back to life. That's all in 1 Kings chapter 17. I'm not going to slow that too far down. But what I am going to do is we are going to talk about Elijah trying to stop this cycle from happening. So, let's go to 1 Kings chapter 18, starting at verse 17. When Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, Is it you, troubler of Israel? He answered, I have not troubled Israel, but you have and your father's house, because you have forsaken the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals. Now therefore have all Israel assemble for me at Mount Carmel with the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. So Ahab sent to all the Israelites and assembled the prophets at Mount Carmel. Elijah then came near to all the people and said, How long will you go on limping with two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal, then follow him. The people did not answer him a word. Then Elijah said to the people, I, even I only, am left a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets number 450. Let 2 bulls be given to us. Let them choose 1 bull for themselves, cut it into pieces and lay it on the wood, but put no fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood, but put no fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers by fire is indeed God. And all the people answered, Well spoken. Elijah wants to break this pattern, the pattern that repeats, the pattern of love for God, falling away from God, being invaded and being restored. Elijah wants to break that pattern, but Elijah's the only prophet of God left. Everybody else has forsaken God. Elijah is it. And because Elijah is it, he is standing up against the 450 priests of Baal at Mount Carmel, and he's saying, Great, let's have a disputation. Let us see who is God and who is fraud. Now, carrying on from there, starting in verse 25. Then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, Choose for yourselves 1 bull and prepare it first, for you are many, then call on the name of your God, but put no fire to it. So they took the bull that was given them, prepared it, and called on the name of Baal from morning until noon, crying, O Baal, answer us! But there was no voice and no answer. They limped about the altar that they had made. At noon Elijah mocked them, saying, Cry aloud, surely he is a god! Either he is meditating, or he has wandered away, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is asleep and must be awakened. Then they cried aloud as was their custom, and they cut themselves with swords and lances until the blood gushed out over them. As midday passed, they raved on until the time of the offering of the oblation, but there was no voice, no answer, and no response. Then Elijah said to all the people, Come closer to me, and all the people came closer to him. First he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been thrown down. Elijah took 12 stones according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord came, saying, Israel shall be your name. With the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord. Then he made a trench around the altar large enough to contain 2 measures of seed. Next he put the wood in order, cut the bull in pieces, and laid it on the wood. He said, Fill 4 jars with water and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood. Then he said, Do it a second time, and they did it a second time. Again he said, Do it a third time, and they did it a third time, so that the water ran all around the altar and filled the trench also with water. Baal does not answer the priests of Baal. They are dancing around, stabbing themselves, jumping up and down, eventually limping because they've been doing this for so long. Elijah says, maybe he's asleep. Maybe he's not listening. Maybe he's on a long journey. Maybe Baal is just too busy to answer you. But when it comes time to prepare the sacrifice, from Elijah's perspective, he says, not only should we build the altar, but we should also dig a trench around it, fill it all full of water, so that this is going to be thoroughly doused, making it catching on fire even less likely. And then he says, O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your bidding. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, so that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering, the wood, the stones, and the dust, and even licked up the water that was in the trench. When all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, The Lord indeed is God, the Lord indeed is God. Elijah said to them, Seize the prophets of Baal, do not let one of them escape. Then they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the Wadi Kishon and killed them there. And then Elijah said to Ahab, Go up, eat and drink, for there is a sound of rushing rain. So Ahab went up to eat and to drink, and Elijah went up to the top of Carmel. And there he bowed himself upon the earth and put his face between his knees. He said to his servant, Go up and look towards the sea. He went up and looked and said, There is nothing. Then he said, Go again 7 times. The 7th time he said, Look, a little cloud is no bigger than a person's hand is rising out of the sea. Then he said, Go and say to Ahab, Harness your chariot and go down before the rain stops you. In a little while the heavens grew black with clouds and wind, and there was heavy rain. Ahab rode off and went to Jezreel, but the hand of the Lord was on Elijah. He girded up his loins and ran in front of Ahab to the entrance of Jezreel. So, Elijah has done his best to not only show that God is God, that he can actually act where Baal can't. And not only that, after this big showdown between Elijah and the prophets of Baal at Mount Carmel, after that, Elijah calls out to God, and God sends rain to finally deal with the drought. This should be proof enough for everybody that God is active and alive and at work with his people, that they should not go after false gods that can't do anything. This should be enough. But of course, it isn't. He is going to be chased away. Starting in chapter 19, Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a message to Elijah saying, So may the gods do to me and more also if I do not make your life like the life of one of them by this time tomorrow. Then he was afraid, and he got up and fled for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and he left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a solitary broom tree. He asked that he might die. It is enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the broom tree and fell asleep. Suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, Get up and eat. He looked, and there at his head was a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. He ate and drank and lay down again. The angel of the Lord came a second time, touched him, and said, Get up and eat, otherwise the journey will be too much for you. He got up and ate and drank, and then he went in the strength of that food for 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. And he came to a cave and spent the night there. Even though he had shown the mighty power of God, Elijah was still chased away, because the cycle continues. Even though Elijah had gone to great efforts for the cycle to not continue, it continued. This is how the cycle of the Kings and Chronicles works. That people fall into worship of false gods and have to be brought back. It's just that simple. So even though Elijah had tried to break the cycle could not be broken because people are still the problem. Jezebel and Ahab are going to be problems. They are going to stop Elijah from breaking that cycle. They're going to say, surely we're going to chase you and kill you. And you're the last prophet of God left, by the way. That's it. After you, there are no more. Until Elijah recruits Elisha, which he does close to the end of 1 Kings. He recruits Elisha, and Elijah and Elisha travel on together for a while and end up being a good double act for a few chapters. We're going to cross into 2 Kings and the end of the story of Elijah and the beginning, really, of the story of Elisha as an independent person. Starting in 2 Kings chapter 2. Now when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven by a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, Stay here, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel. But Elisha said, As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you. So they went down to Bethel. The company of prophets who were in Bethel came out to Elisha and said to him, Do you know that today the Lord will take your master away from you? He said, Yes, I know it. Keep silent. Elijah said to him, Elisha, stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho. But he said, As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you. So they came to Jericho. The company of prophets who were at Jericho drew near to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know your master, that today the Lord will take your master away from you?" And he answered, "Yes, I know, be silent." Then Elijah said, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me to the Jordan." But he said, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So the two of them went on. 50 men of the company of prophets also went, and they stood at some distance from them, as they were both standing by the Jordan. Then Elijah took his mantle and rolled it up and struck the water, and the water was parted to the one side and to the other, and the two of them crossed on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me what I may do for you before I am taken from you." Elisha said, "Please let me inherit a double share of your spirit." He responded, "You have asked a hard thing, yet if you see me as I am being taken from you, it will be granted you, and if not, it will not." As they continued walking and talking, a chariot of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them, and Elijah ascended in a whirlwind into heaven. Elisha kept watching and crying out, "Father, Father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen." But when he could no longer see him, he grasped his own clothes and tore them into two pieces. And he picked up the mantle of Elijah that had fallen from him and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. Whose responsibility is it now going to be to make sure that the people of Israel are doing what they should? That's going to fall to Elisha, because Elijah was taken up to heaven. You should remember that going forward. Elijah, the one who stood alone as a prophet of God, the one who stood mighty up against the other prophets, the one who tried to break that cycle, was taken up physically into heaven. There was the chariots of fire, the horses of fire, the whirlwind, and up he goes until he is seen no more. We are going to see him again, but the return of Elijah is going to be a major feature moving into the New Testament, because the idea is that until Elijah comes back, the Messiah will not appear. You have to have Elijah's return, who is going to be coming in ahead of the return of the Messiah. And when people look for Christ to be the Messiah, they're going to ask about Elijah. They're going to say, right, are you Elijah? They're going to ask John the Baptist the same question. Are you Elijah who is to come? Are you the one we should be looking for, or should we wait for another? Because they know that the spirit of Elijah has to return in some way, in some capacity, in order for the Messiah to return. And in some ways, there are still people who, like at the Passover, set out a separate place setting for Elijah the prophet now. Now, there are a few miracles that are done here in 2 Kings where people conceive and give birth, where stew is purified, where water is made clean. I'm not going to bother you with all those details right now. Just know that Elisha is able to do miracles in addition to the ones that Elijah was doing. He is able to do a great, goodly number of things, some of which are grand and elaborate, some of which are pretty mundane, like purifying a stew so people can eat it is not like a big grand miracle. But it's something that shows that God is working with Elisha. And this is going to come to a head in the presence of Naaman the Syrian. Naaman, who has leprosy. And leprosy is a skin disease. It's a nerve disease that causes you to lose sensation in your extremities, which get damaged, which gets broken, which don't heal, that kind of thing. So when Naaman the Syrian is coming to Elisha in 2 Kings chapter 5, he's going to ask for healing. So in 2 Kings chapter 5, Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Aram, was a great man and in high favor with his master, because by him the Lord had given victory to Aram. The man, though a mighty warrior, suffered from leprosy. Now the Arameans on one of their raids had taken a young girl captive from the land of Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." So Naaman went in and told his lord just what the girl from the land of Israel had said. And the king of Aram said, "Go then, and I will send along a letter to the king of Israel." He went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of garments. He brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, "When this letter reaches you, know that I have sent you my servant Naaman, that you may cure him of his leprosy." When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God to give death or life, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? Just look and see how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me." But when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent a message to the king, "Why have you torn your clothes? Let him come to me, that he may learn that there is a prophet in Israel." Naaman's looking for healing. Naaman is not a local boy. He's not of the house of Israel. He's quite foreign, quite distant from Israel. And he's looking for healing from Israel, from Israel's God. The king of Israel says, well, what am I supposed to do? I can't make you better. Am I a doctor? Can I do magic? I can't help you. But Elisha says, send him to me, that he may know that there is a God in Israel. So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and halted at the entrance of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean. But Naaman became angry and went away, saying, I thought that for me he would surely come out and stand and call on the name of the Lord, his God, and would wave his hand over the spot and cure the leprosy. Are not Abna and Parphar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? He turned and went away in a rage. But his servants approached and said to him, Father, if the prophet had commanded you to do something difficult, would you not have done it? How much more when all he said was, wash and be clean? So he went down and immersed himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a young boy, and he was clean. Naaman the Syrian is going to push back against the very simple thing that Elisha wants him to do. Saying, well, that's what you want me to do? Just like wash in the Jordan River? We have better rivers than that at home. And the servant says, if God had told you to do something hard, you would have done it. Why not do that, which is very easy? He's in the Jordan River. Remember how we were talking earlier about them asking John the Baptist if John the Baptist was going to be like Elijah who is to come, that kind of thing. What John the Baptist does is to baptize people in the Jordan River, and baptism is a very simple thing, right? It's just you are washed in water 3 times in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and that's it. That's what happens in a baptism. It's very simple, very brief, and people look at that and they say, well, that's not anything. That can't do anything. Surely that can't do too much. And our response is to say the same thing as the servants said to Naaman. If God had asked you to do something hard, you would have done it. Why are you fighting him on something easy? Great question. So Naaman goes, bathes in the waters of the Jordan, and comes up clean. Now, Naaman isn't baptized there, but that looks like baptism. It's a reminder for New Testament people who come to be baptized by John in the Jordan River. They understand the language that's being used. They're being dipped down into the Jordan River, and they come up clean. Not physically clean from leprosy, but spiritually clean. That's how God has chosen to wash us clean of our sins. And it seems like it's not much, but God is only asking us to do something very, very simple indeed. Nothing complicated, nothing physically difficult, nothing too demanding. He is just saying, do this and you will be clean. Then he returned to the man of God, he and all his company. He came and stood before him and said, now I know that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel. Please accept a present from your servant. But he said, as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will accept nothing. He urged him to accept, but he refused. Then Naaman said, if not, please let 2 mule loads of earth be given to your servant, for your servant will no longer offer burnt offering or sacrifice to any god except the Lord. But may the Lord pardon your servant on one count. When my master goes into the house of Rimmon to worship there, leaning on my arm, and I bow down in the house of Rimmon, when I do bow down in the house of Rimmon, may the Lord pardon your servant on this one count. And he said to him, go in peace. What ends up happening is that Naaman takes like wheelbarrows full of dirt back away from Israel. Takes all this dirt back so that he can take some of Israel back with him. So he can take a piece of Israel, drag it all the way back to him, back to where he's going in Syria, because he kind of wants to take the presence of God back with him. He says, there is no God but the God who is in Israel. Let me take a bundle of dirt back with me that I may worship the Lord your God where I am in Syria. But of course, you don't have to do that. God is everywhere. He's absolutely everywhere. He's with you when you're in Israel, in the Promised Land. He's with you in the waters of the Jordan. But we understand that God is present in our waters of baptism too. That when you are being baptized in the water here at Good Shepherd Lutheran Church, for example, it's every bit as effective as if you were in the Jordan River being baptized by John himself. Now, for most of the rest of the books of Kings and Chronicles, it is going to be that repetitive story. It is going to be the story of prophets trying to bring the people of Israel back to worship God. They do. They fall back into sin again. They are chastised. They are punished. They are pulled away from their own land, and then they are brought back. And this happens over and over and over again. We're not going to go, as I say, too deeply into it, but we are going to get to the end of the book of 2 Kings. You remember when King Solomon had built the temple, after such a long time of people going through this cycle, faith in God, rejection of God, being chastised, and then brought back to faith. After so many of these cycles, eventually everything breaks down, everything falls apart. And when that happens, the temple of God is smashed to pieces during the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. If we go to 2 Kings chapter 24, and this is after all the kings have either sinned or been good, they've been brought into exile, been brought back, that kind of thing. So 2 Kings chapter 24, starting at verse 1, in his days King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came up. Jehoiakim became his servant for 3 years. Then he turned and rebelled against him. The Lord sent against him bands of the Chaldeans, bands of the Arameans, bands of the Moabites, and bands of the Ammonites. He sent them against Judah to destroy it according to the word of the Lord that he spoke by his servants the prophets. Surely this came upon Judah at the command of the Lord to remove them out of his sight for the sins of Manasseh, for all that he had committed, and for the innocent blood that he had shed, for he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, and the Lord was not willing to pardon. So Jehoiakim slept with his ancestors. Then his son Jehoiakim succeeded him. The king of Egypt did not come again out of his land, for the king of Babylon had taken over all that belonged to the king of Egypt, from the Wadi of Egypt to the river Euphrates. Skipping ahead a wee shade. At that time, the servants of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came up to Jerusalem, and the city was besieged. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to the city while his servants were besieging it. King Jehoiakim of Judah gave himself up to the king of Babylon, himself, his mother, his servants, his officers, and his palace officials. The king of Babylon took him prisoner in the 8th year of his reign. He carried off all the treasures of the house of the Lord and all the pieces of the king's house. He cut into pieces all the vessels of gold in the temple of the Lord which Solomon of Israel had made. All this as the Lord had foretold. He carried away all Jerusalem, all the officials, all the warriors, 10,000 captives, all the artisans and the smiths. No one remained except the poorest people of the land. He carried away Jehoiakim to Babylon, the king's mother, the king's wives, his officials, and the elite of the land. He took into captivity from Jerusalem to Babylon. The king of Babylon brought captive to Babylon all the men of valor, 7,000, the artisans and the smiths, 1,000, all of them strong and fit for war. And then Zedekiah takes over after Jehoiakim. Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon. In the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, on the 10th day of the month, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came with all his army against Jerusalem and laid siege to it. They built siege works around it all around. So the city was besieged until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. On the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine became so severe in the city that there was no food for the people of the land. Then a breach was made in the city wall. The king with all the soldiers fled by night by the way of the gate between the two walls, by the king's garden, though the Chaldeans were all around the city. They went in the direction of the Arabah, but the army of the Chaldeans pursued the king and overtook him in the plains of Jericho. All his army was scattered, deserting him. Then they captured the king and brought him up to the king of Babylon at Rilbah, who passed sentence on him. They slaughtered the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes. They put out the eyes of Zedekiah. They bound him in fetters and took him to Babylon. In the 5th month, on the 7th day of the month, which was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the bodyguard, a servant of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He burned the house of the Lord, the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem. Every great house he burned down. All the army of the Chaldeans who were with the captain of the guard broke down the walls around Jerusalem. The captain of the guard carried into exile the rest of the people who were left in the city and the deserters who had defected to the king of Babylon, all the rest of the population. But the captain of the guard left some of the poorest people of the land to be vine dressers and tillers of the soil. That's it. That's the end of Israel. Israel has been conquered, taken over, crushed, and destroyed. The temple has been knocked down, and removed. And that is going to be the end of that story for a while. The people of Israel are carried away into captivity, into the house of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. They are going to be taken there to be converted away from being Jews into being Babylonians. But it's not going to take. The lesson of the dirt that Naaman the Syrian tried to take with him to say, surely the Lord can go with me if I take the dirt with you. But the dirt wasn't necessary. The people of Israel, when they're taken away into captivity, now that the temple's gone, the house of God has been knocked down, all these things have been crushed and ruined and despoiled, what are the people of Israel going to do after that in order to keep themselves faithful servants of God? How are they going to keep that fire going and burning within them? Well, we're going to get to that next time. But know that we're going to skip the rest of the Kings and Chronicles. Don't worry about the Chronicles. It's going to tell that same story over and over and over again until we get to the reign of Cyrus the Persian and the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. And that'll take us through to the major prophets and minor prophets. Again, these prophets we're not going to go too in-depth into. They exist. They're around. They're important. They tell a vital story. But we're not going to really bog ourselves down too hard in them. For now, let's pray. Gracious Lord, we thank you for your presence here and every place, for not requiring us to bring shovelfuls of dirt from Israel wherever we go, but to remind us that you are Lord over all the earth, wherever we happen to be, whether at home or at school, whether we're here in this great province or elsewhere. We remember that you travel with us wherever we go, because you are the Lord of heaven and earth. You are in charge of all of creation, and we thank and praise your holy name that you are with us wherever we go. We ask for your comfort and your presence in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Thanks for suffering through the most boringest part of the Bible. Next time, we're going to pick up with Ezra, Nehemiah, and the rebuilding of the Wall of Jerusalem. Thanks, guys. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.